Thanks for joining us for this conversation today between artist Amanda Heng and our curator Charmaine Toh. Before I hand over, I just want to give a brief introduction about our speakers today. Okay, firstly, our moderator, Charmaine Toh. Charmaine Toh is curator here at National Gallery, Singapore. She's also part of the curatorial team for the Awakenings exhibition. Charmaine was also one of the co-curators of the 2013 Singapore Biennale, and she's doing her PhD candidate at University of Melbourne, and she researches on pictorial photography in Singapore from the 1950s to 70s. Next, we'll introduce Amanda. Amanda is one of Singapore's most prolific female contemporary artists. She's well known locally and internationally for her collaborative and multidisciplinary art practice. Through her work, Amanda has continually confronted the politics of the body, gender, identity, and society. She has also played key roles in the Singapore art scene through the years through organizing, co-curating, and participating in exhibitions and events, as well as establishing and facilitating collective practices amongst artists. Please join me in welcoming them. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So just welcome on this Saturday morning, and thank you for coming along. Thank you to Amanda as well for agreeing to do this discussion. I just want to briefly let you know what's going to be happening today. So what we will do is actually, I'm going to play about a 5-minute excerpt of She, He, which is the work that's in the Awakenings exhibition, after which Amanda will briefly talk about that particular work, and then we'll go into a discussion about Amanda's broader artistic practice. And actually, Amanda's actually brought along a lot of archival material that she dug up, which I hadn't even seen like most of it. So I think you guys will find it really interesting because a lot of the events that she will be talking about is very, very unknown, I think, for a lot of us who are even researching contemporary art in Singapore. So I'm just going to go ahead and play the video. I'll play about 5 minutes of it. Oops. Okay, so that was She performed at the National Institute of Education in '95. So Amanda, would you like to just briefly tell the audience about that particular performance?
Hi everyone. Morning. Thank you for coming. She is a very important, or I would say one of the most probably structured work or complete work performance work that I presented, and that was in 1993. Before that, of course, I did a lot of experimental work, more like trying out that kind of things. Yeah. It was also one of the important work because it actually deals with the very urgent issues for me at that time, at that point of time, which is in the early 90s, when just to give you a little bit the context of this work and also my relations to art scene, how did I come about, into this field. I was born after the war and then went through a witness experience after the war, and then the country fought for independence. And after independence, the crazy pursuit for economic establishments and things like that. So I went through all these things, and of course there were a very drastic change within 30 years from a really kind of whatever that we have when, say in terms of my families, when my parents and great-grandparents came from China and, just starting to establish themselves. And then all of a sudden the war destruction, and then now all this happening. A lot of things were changes quite drastically. Yeah. So it was those kind of period, and there was one particular important policies that I thought was really important for me, and that was the language issues. When the country was fighting to establish itself, having kind of won over from the imperialism, the British, colony, there was this needs, so-called, to deal with this or with the vision for creating a multicultural society. And all the ethnic culture and language were put down as or placed as second rate, and highlighting the English speaking, the English language as a common language for all the different races. And I was actually educated in the Chinese schools run by private Chinese, set up by Chinese businessmen, and I was taught to be proud of my tradition, the Chinese culture. There's this strong cultural link still with something happening in China and things like that. And it was really a shock. The moment I graduated from my school, pre-university, and got into societies and start working, I found that whatever I learned from school became irrelevant. And I see, then you see schools start to close down, Chinese schools start to close down, of course with Malays and Tamil school as well. So the ideas of how to actually, where to go, where to belong, and how do you make yourself useful and make contributions to these societies that one should think of as a young person. Those kind of displacement, those kind of helplessness was the urgent issues, the crisis that I need to look into. And that was how this work comes about. And of course, in between, we were also in the process of becoming modern. So this process of modernizations. And then at home, these ideas about how a woman should be treated in a Chinese tradition. So all these become very important issues in relating to my search or my quest to understand what do we mean when we talk about identity. Yeah. So So in this work just now, you were looking at, I was writing, trying to make this language, on my face. So they were actually deconstructing the English alphabets and also the Chinese writing. Yeah, so they were very basic lines and drawings and all that. And then it is an attempt to kind of create a new language perhaps. Yeah, I was looking for new possibilities, for a new language where I can then claim my soul language, So I think I found that in art with this piece. So it was a very important experience for me, because with this work, I learned to how to, through the art making, process this thought, these inquiries, and finding my own answer and gaining my confidence through this whole experience. And the most important thing is that it is an attempt to negotiate space in those kind of situations. And also, it was for the first time, I was able to actually define for myself what it is to be a woman. Yeah, so that was the importance of this piece.
Can you also speak a bit about, so we saw in the video the act of you making the ball of flour and eating
yes.
it and regurgitating it?
Yes, yes. The work actually comes with, as I said, it was more complex and structured work, because there were a lot of consideration. Obviously, you see a lot of theatre influence as well. For example, in terms of costume, makeup, lighting, sound, and so on. There were a dressing table as a prop, and on top of the dressing table, there were flour and with water. So in the midst, you saw, I was putting, making a dough and then putting it in my mouth, trying to mold something. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work just now. It was too much water, too little flour. And then I forgot that I have actually denture in my mouth. So anyway, that was an attempt to bring it out and then place it on the, in front of the altar. This altar represents the Chinese tradition. Yeah, so what I wanted to say, as you go on with the performance, then I picked up the dough and then I throw it with force outside into the audience. So a kind of visual gestures to reject it. That these traditions of me being imposed on as a subservient women in the traditions. Yeah, so this is just part of the whole performance. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, even today, you were introduced as a socially engaged artist, and a lot of your works are kind of framed within the idea of politics, activism, and so on. So I thought maybe we can talk a little bit about what your idea of activist art is, or what your idea of political art is, particularly given the fact that your work's being included in the Awakenings exhibition at the moment.
Yeah, maybe we could go on to the next. With these ideas, or rather problematic relations between the politics and art, especially within the context of Singapore, yeah, I found this quote from Francis Ellis for one of his work was actually very apt for that. Yeah, I think when we talk about political arts in today or in contemporary world, in fact, every artist engages with politics. Yeah, whether we like it or not. Artists are often responding to the environment, to changes, and this is the basic thing that required of the artist if you want to express your true sense. Yeah, and of course it became problematic talking about that in Singapore in those days, in the 50s, 60s, where political situations was really, it was the Cold War time, communist ideology in China were coming up. So it was a situation where, and Singapore is seen as the third Chinese country, something like that. Yeah. So it was, there was all these stigma. Yeah. And political arts of those days were equivalents to propaganda art and those kind of things. Yeah, but the kind of political, how contemporary artists engages with political issue or situation in today's world is a lot more than that. It is artists who address those changes and that affect the humankind. And if art is not talking about those very important issues, then I don't know what is art. So we must engage politically. We must engage with politics. Yeah. So I think it is the problem with the way we look at the term taking out in different contexts. Yeah. And I hope it should not be a problem. Yeah. I wanted to show you these two slides because they were very important reference for me. Of course, with Gandhi's short walk or march, this is more common language that everyone knows about. But I thought it was a really, really poetic. He actually started a non-violence movement, and has been kind of used very often today. What we saw, what's happening in Yangon and so many other countries. Yeah. I thought he was a real contemporary artist because of this act. He changed the whole life of the country and the population, the Indian population. Yeah. With Professor Yunus, who I only came to know rather late. But he was offered this Nobel Prize, Peace Prize, because he came up with new, what do you call that? Microcredit. Yeah. But what happens with Professor Yunus, the story goes that he was trained in the States and became an economist. Yeah. And came back to Bangladesh thinking that he could do a lot for the country, in such a poor state, But then he realized soon that what he acquired from the States cannot be used in Bangladesh because people are just too poor to have guarantee for the bank when you need money to do whatever you need. Yeah. So he came out with this macro credit, which give very little amount of money to help with the poor, and then allow them to establish themselves economically. So the point of even you are the very poor person, you can still help yourself with little help from other people. Yeah. So this now become very worldwide, use. And actually, Professor Yunus was invited to Singapore a few times, and I attended a lecture some time ago. But his ideas are never used in Singapore. Maybe we don't have any poor people in Singapore. Yeah. So I was very impressed with him because he was particularly helpful to the women. He noticed that when you give a little bit of money to the women, they were put to use to set up the family, to set up business, so that they could be economically independent and then put food on table and take care of the education of the children. As if he put the money to the husband, they go gambling or having a drink. Yeah, so there's a big difference, and this actually was very helpful for the Bangladesh women. Yeah. The dinner party from Chicago, as well as Joseph Boy's 7,000 Oak Trees, they were also both very important role models that I learned from my development. Of course, Judy Chicago's was a very well-known kind of feminist artist, and who has actually changed the whole traditions in the education system in United States. How to create a kind of program that talks about voices from women, and how do we change the whole ideas about the values that come from women. Yeah, so including her work using craft that often acquired by women and quietly slotting away at home or in all those cottages businesses that were not recognized and not well paid, not paid enough Yeah. So this is dinner party. And 7,000 oak trees impresses me. It takes a long time for that to happen. Castles was really after the industrial changes and a dead city, and how to kind of renew the whole city. And Joseph Beuys was very creative in that sense, that offer the audience to take care of, to sponsor one tree, and then to have it planted in the city. So if you visit Castle today, you still see the art growing along the street. Yeah. So that taught me this kind of art is not actually made for museums to decorate or to decorate home, but it is actually addressing our life, make changes to make our life better. And this is how it established the kind of principles for me to develop my practice. Yeah.
Thanks, Amanda. So now that we've kind of heard a bit about, I think, your wider influences in your art practice, I just want to turn the discussion to what was happening in Singapore, and particularly a discussion about the artist village, because the artist village has almost taken on a quite disproportionate prominence in Singapore art history. We're always talking about the artist village in the kind of change, a turn towards the contemporary art. And perhaps you could talk a little bit about whether the artist village did make that significant a contribution to your personal practice, or perhaps that there were wider influences around the late 80s and early 90s.
Yeah, before we get into talking about Artist Village, I wanted to show you this, the first women's show in Singapore. 4 women student artists just graduated from La Salle. This was 1988. And it was a show that's curated by a fellow student, Wang Kuo-wei, and he actually was working in these bookshops in Bras Basah complex. And he found out that there's this display, window display space, which not used. So he suggested that we got together and put up a show. And that was the first women's show, yeah, in 1988.
Who were the artists?
The artists were Pauline Goh, and Mary Ong, and also Chong Wei Yu. I think they all no longer dealing with art now. Yeah, I'm the sole survival. Yeah. So then I would like to also go on to those days. The ideas of coming into art, it was frightening, but I didn't know what to do. For me, it was a deliberate choice, and I knew that I have to figure out some way for me. So after La Salle, what next, So we got together with some students and then start to look for studio space and things like that. So what you're seeing here is actually a studio space in Seletar, which I shared with Han Saipo and Vincent Liao. And later on, we found out that there were actually many different groups of people sharing studios there as well. For example, April Ng, who is the printmaker then, sharing with her partner in another house, not far away from us. And then there's also Chang Jing In, who also sharing with some other people. These were students from NAFA. Yeah, our studio space here. During the weekdays, they were studios where we work, but during weekend, there were private parties going on like this. Yeah. So this was one of the party, and we have team for the party usually. So this night it was a punk party, and our invited guests were all enjoying ourselves as punk. Yeah. So these were, we call that unofficial collectives. So they kind of formed just quite naturally and in a very organic forms. Yeah. And now what you see is the beginning of the Artist Village. It was still unofficial because the Artist Village was only officially registered in 1994 or 93. I think it's 94. Yeah. So this was in the 80s, late 80s. And basically, it was Thang Dao's home. And because it was in a village where most of the people were vacated for military training. The land was offered for military training. And there's a small group of farmers who refused to move away, so take the opportunity to rent out the empty space. So Dao got hold of some of the space, and then we turned them into studio space. And this was quite surprising move for Singapore at that time, because there was no such thing happening in Singapore before. Although there were already a lot of all these artist group, art associations is going on. There were hundreds of them. But I think probably the Artist Village is quite different in a way that it is the artist initiative. And it is open to the public very often with open studios and all kinds of activities, sharing the process of making art. So as opposed to you're an individual artist, you locked yourself in the studio, the public only come in contact with the artwork when it is nicely completed and framed in the gallery. Yeah, so this is, I think, very big difference. And for us students who just graduated, it is a really great platforms to get together, support each other, and continue our practice. Yeah.
Yeah, so remember when we were talking about this earlier, you were stressing the importance of the self-help spirit during this time. So maybe can talk a bit about how these informal collectives kind of encourage that kind of help between fellow artists.
The kind of self-help spirit actually always in us as human beings. Yeah, when you're in front of crisis, your life is threatened. Definitely, you help yourself. You know, you find ways and means to figure out a way. Yeah. And I think it's those kind of, But in the 50s, 60s, where most Singaporeans have those kind of fighting spirit, because the situation called for it, you know. Yeah. Also in the 90s, everything is already planned for us. And then is this small group of artists who realize that other than the plan, we want to find an alternative way of living. So it is another form of survival. So it comes up with, you kind of draw those resources within you and begin to help yourself. This is really important because it's, especially in the situations where everything is taken over and decided for you. There's a chance that you turn yourself into a robot, yeah, or economic animal, which being a human being, I think there's more than that. Meaning of life is more than that. And to find out, we have to take our own initiative. I think this is showing in that group of artists and who is looking for something else. Yeah. So this is Hongbi Warehouse. I wanted to show this because in terms, today's slide, today's talks, it was actually discussing all these important elements of the practice and also how they actually shape my practice and development. They are important because I wanted to, from my perspective, I wanted to discuss why they are important as collective or self-help spirits and all that, how this element adds to my practice and also help shape the kind of principles in my work. Yeah. Hongbi Warehouse was an abandoned warehouse for more than 10 years. And it was offered to the Artist Village as a group to be part of the fringe event at the only visual art event at the Festival of Art. Yeah. We were really excited with this space because it's such a huge space, you know, and in those days, as a young artist, you would never get a chance to get into the institution. Yeah. So creating your own space, you know, is the thing that you must do. And it took us about 3 months to transform that space and turn it into a international space for exhibitions. And the exhibitions invited about 50 artists, 50 works, and they includes international artists as well. Do I have to go on with this?
Oh, no,
yeah.
Okay. I think we'll.
So now we come over to some of the small groups, activities or collectives, and obviously tends to work with more women artists. I think it's a coincidence as well as also a natural development, I think. Yeah, because in the artist village, it was rather lonely as only female members there. Besides, of course, Hazel, who was Tang Dao's ex-wife, and So Siu Kiat has eventually kind of disappeared from the art scene. So I was the only women members over there. So it's rather lonely. And of course, I sought other women artists to work together. That was a natural process. So this was the early days, Ho Sun Yin, Tan Kun Ni, and the late Juliana Yasim. We used to meet together. I remember it was Kwok Pao Kun's studios practice, theater practice at Stamford Road, and they occupy a space. But their corridor was always empty. So Kwok Pao Kun was very kind to say that you guys can use the corridors when you need space to do your work and all that. So we gathered there and do drawing or just chit-chat, shared issues about art and things like that. So another place that we always go is this YMCA, McDonald's or YMCA, where they cater to a lot of students. The students are gathered there and then stay the whole day with one coffee. Yeah, so that's what we did too. And there were lots of things that we talked about, art practices, about situation for women artists and so on. Yeah, so we also performed together. We were really hungry for knowledge and how to develop, our art practice. And what you see now is some of the performances that we did together, and some were more individual. So we perform as a group as well as exhibit as individual artists. Yeah. So these are kind of from my own archive. That's what I have. Yeah. What you see here, a weekend performance event at the Space, Hongbi Warehouse. Yeah. And then with this one was the National Sculpture Show at the former National History Art Gallery.
National Museum Art Gallery.
National Museum Art Gallery, yeah. It was our first sculpture show, and performance art was included for the first time.
Yeah. So I think now it's a good time to move our discussion to like this idea of women and their artworks in Singapore. And while I was researching for this particular discussion, I actually found quite a few exhibitions that happened in Singapore in the early 90s that were actually not very well researched at all. So Amanda has already briefly talked about Words and Works, which was in 88 in Bras Basah. In 91, NMAG hosted an exhibition called Women and Their Art. In 92, there were 2 exhibitions at the substation where Amanda was actually working as a programmer at that time. So I think one of the things you want to talk about is her role, not just as an artist, but as an organizer as well. And these 2 exhibitions were We Kiss Next Tuesday, which featured Dominic Hui and Sun Yin, as well as A Frame of Mind, which featured Juliana Yasin and Chen Kun Yi. And then in 98, you collaborated with the Singapore International Film Festival. And this is the event that I actually hadn't even come across until I did the research for this talk. And there was a program within the film festival called Women About Women, which showed at the Singapore Art Museum. And it featured 7 local artists and 13 international artists. So, there's, I guess it wasn't a lot of events, but there were these quite key events and exhibitions that were happening through the 90s. So I think it would be really interesting if you could just share more about these events, which haven't been documented in any article or book.
Yeah. So I suppose this is a result. This was in 1991. It actually initiated by myself and also another artist, Catherine Au Yong. Catherine Au Yong is an art teacher and a major in abstractions. So she was making very different kind of arts from me. But we somewhat get along very well, and then started to think about having platforms for women alone, and then also at the same time take the opportunity to find out who are other women practicing in Singapore. So this was the result of that, and it was called Women and Their Arts. It was actually the two artists initiative, but we got eventually the support of the National Museum Art Gallery, and the curators was very kind to offer a writing for our brochures. Yeah. So it was also for the first time women's artists. I think it's about maybe 7 or 8 of us got together, and we were all from very different art field. Yeah, and decided to. The team was really quite open for when we suggested to them. So in any case, those days, the ideas of curating was not there, but it's just that we wanted a platform for all of us to get together and show what we have done. Yeah. So this is the result of that. But then over the weekend, there were always discussions going on. Yeah. And I remember at a point of time, I had a chance to make a trip to London and also visited the London's archive run by the women, for the women artists. So I met up with some 5 women artists in London at the time, and then brought some of their work and then shared at the weekend's discussion. So this was one of the discussion just now when you see with Philip Chia and Pauline Po as a moderator for the discussion. Yeah, so eventually the women's groups were then became international. But this was also partly because of the performance art thing. Yeah, I guess everyone knows that in 1993, 94, at the AGS, Artist General Assembly, Josephine was arrested because of these, supposed to be indecent act. And because of that, we became internationally known instantly because everybody heard about Singapore banning performance work. And the Performance International Circuit began to send invitation to all of us. And then we began to travel internationally because we couldn't practice here. Yeah. So Bangkok is one of the space where we have the chance to continue with our practice. And during those kind of activities, those kind of exchange, I begin to meet up with a lot of women artists. Yeah, so groups here like Japanese artist Ito and then Thai artists here, they were all very excited because it was first time that we realized that there were women artists actually actively practicing and having their voice and all that. Yeah, so we begin to get together and come up with ideas of having likewise having show together and all that. That's how Women Manifesto 1 and 2 happened in 1997 and 1999. But of course, it continued now, become an online exhibition run by some younger artists, women artists. Yeah. So this is some of the works that I did during, I think, Women Manifesto 2. Yeah. Then in 1999, I began to, I was given a studio space at Teluk Kurau. So I began to think about, how those activities with, those connection with women outside Singapore can happen in Singapore, and picking up all those things again. And, so I started to, I was also partly working at La Salle's and offering some workshops and all that. So there were some women students to show interest. So I begin to invite them to put together some forms of portfolios by women, and then starts to collect their archives and so on. And then, I also, in the process, realized that women artists very often didn't have much confidence in themselves. So for example, like we didn't know how to kind of prepare ourselves a good portfolio or present ourselves in a talk, a presentation. So Wita then got a few women together and decided to open the space at Teluk Kurau in my studios to have a space for women, opens for women every monthly for either discussions or women's talk. Yeah, and so the name of the group is called WITA, it's Women in the Arts, and then the monthly talk that we have is called We Talk. Yeah. So this is some of the often the talk not necessarily only stay put at Teluk Kurau, but as and when members have exhibition, we then move the talk to the exhibition site. Yeah, so that the women can then discuss about their work or share their ideas then. Yeah. So the talk was also not confined to just women alone. And of course, we also involved the international women artists who come by or who happen to station in Singapore. There were also talks by male artists or art writers or teachers. Yeah, so what you see here, like Cheng Ju was the art teacher or history scholar in school. And we have also Han Hong here, Han Yong Hong here, who was working as the art reporters in the Chao Bao. Yeah. So we thus decide not to confine our discussion within just the women's group as well as the art communities. It has to involve wider circles of people. Yeah. And eventually, besides the talk, we started to then have collaboration with other collectives like Perfect Space or P10. So what you see here, Exchange 05 was a collaborative event conceptualized and organized by WITAS and P10. The ideas was to look into the kind of interdisciplinary collaborations that was happening at that time a lot. Yeah, and so the artists that we invited or speakers we invited were involving theater, people from theater practice, people from dance, people who were scientists, and also people who were writers and so on. Yeah, so so this whole thing were then organized by a working team which involved members of the P10s as well as WITAS at the time. So some of the important members in WITAS includes Margaret Tan, who is now a doctor practicing as well as lecturing in NUS. Shirley Shou, who is now a practicing artist. Xu Fang, who is now working in taking care of the education programs in NGS. Yeah. Yeah, so all of a sudden we come to here now to the international event, international film event, a collaboration with Philip Chias, who head the event at that moment. And Philip Chia and I was very good friends. I started working with the substation, and substation was often the important venues for international film festivals. Yeah, so that's how the collaboration came about. And we got the support of the SAM and that offered this auditorium there and allow us to present this women's show. We only want to kind of really look into the psyches of modern women and how do they deal with the new technology of that time. Yeah, so there is a kind of areas of selections where we only invite women artists who involved in performance work, video, and film. Yeah, so we include some very important women artists from Japan, like Mako Zidemichi, who was the first women artist involved in film and video, and of course Shirley Silver from the USA, who was actually very active part of film festival in Singapore. Then eventually the women's circle internationally got wider. From Tokyo, news went to Osaka. Then they decided to organize event as well. And in this case, it was a Tachikawa film art festival. This year, it was headed by a female curator, Emiko. Then Emiko decided that let's have a women's perspective for this festival. So all women artists were invited from all over the place. We were given a month of residency, and then we come out with the work. Yeah. So this was my presentation at the festival. There were portraits by women, and I had this residency for 1 month, and I started to interview. It was part of the continuation from the collaboration with my mother. So because I have the response from many people regarding this relationship between mother and daughter. So I thought it would be interesting to carry out that, experiment, or that figure out those experience in another cultural context of Japan. Yeah, so I started to work with them. And before that, of course, I had a chance to have residency in Germany. I did the same thing. So this was actually accumulated. Yeah. So today we have about 50 portraits from women. Yeah. So women shared their stories about their relationship with their mother or daughter, and then they took. I make that portrait for them, and then they put up their statements on the portrait by themselves. Yeah. So in this case, it happens in Suzhou in 2013. That was the most recent one. Yeah. So in Osaka, women begin to get together and organize event for ourselves, and I got invited quite a few to Japan. Yeah, this is one of them. Yeah. As I was telling, I was talking about the substation earlier, and we were discussing in terms of art collectives. In the early days, substation was a very important space in relating to, or in terms of developments of contemporary art. Yeah, it started in the 90s and was run by, initiated, of course, founded by the late Guo Baokun, who was a dramatist. And so eventually, most of the project that I had was sponsored or supported by the substation. The aim or objective of the substation right from the beginning was to cater to local artists and developing a kind of more deeper and more vigorous kind of articulation or discourse in Singapore art, or about Singapore art. Yeah. So we had a chance then to get a lot of support whenever we offer some event. And in this case, what you're looking at is Open Ends, which is the first time artists got together again, they were all artist initiative. I approached the directors of the substation then, who were Audrey Wong and Lee Weng Choi, to present the exhibitions of the documentation of 10 years of performance art, starting from 85 to 95. Yeah. What troubled me at that time was that because of Joseph Ng's incidents, the whole society talked about performance art, or associate performance art with politics, with Tang Da Wu or Joseph Ng, and ignoring the fact that there were actually many performance work going on already. Yeah, so I started to gather all those archives from all the artists and put up with randoms or photos, we put up an exhibition. So it was the first exhibitions of documentation in Singapore here at the substation. Yeah. There were also a catalogue of 25 pieces, limited editions produced with together with interview by some artists about performance work. Yeah. Again, talking about artist initiative and women artists for that matters, actually does put in a lot of effort. With this case, it was a show by, apologize for this, the blackout here. We don't know what is going on. Someone couldn't get it right. Yeah. It was an exhibition called Real Work. And it was the initiative. Sorry? The Housework Project, sorry, the Housework Project. I got it mistaken from another event that I had in Germany. This is Housework Project, yeah. Housework Project came about in response to the domestic help and the very difficult issues of that time where a lot of domestic help were being ill-treated. Yeah, so we wanted to look into those issues. So we started with survey, bringing out questions and interviewing people, and then use that as our reference to create, and this is through an open call. People can respond to this theme from their perspective and then interpret in their own and then present the work. Yeah. So again, so this is a women initiative. And here I'm showing you is another collaboration between myself and two other artists, Ching Choleng and her husband from Poland, Vincent. Yeah. So what we came up with was this home service. Yeah. We make ourselves the domestic help and go out to 20 homes to offer our cleaning service on the conditions that they will sit down with us and discuss all these whole issues. We were more interested in figuring out how introducing this domestic help from foreign country of a different cultural background, how does that affect and change our family values? So we were more interested in those things, and of course coupled with so many other issues as well. Yeah.
So Amanda, just a quick break, because I just wanted to ask you a little question, which was, with all these events happening in Singapore around women artists, what was the response of the male artists?
Of the male artists?
Yeah, I mean from TAV and after TAV.
From TAV to after TAV.
Yeah, because you had some events during the TAV days and then the substation events, Vitas and all.
Yeah. I remember in the TAV days when I first did the Women and Their Arts in 1991, I have an immediate response from a male members in the TAV. Why all women only? But then the fact that there were a lot of shows that present only male artists, no one asked question about that. Yeah, of course I ignore him. Yeah. So that was the response, and that was immediate response. But then when the show was put up, I got really, really exciting response from a lot of male public who were very appreciative of a very fresh perspective from women artists. Yeah, so there was very great difference. When you come down to then this event, for example, the Housework Project, a lot of male artists actually volunteered themselves and participated. People like Jason Wee, people like Jill Maso, and there are many of them who volunteered themselves to be part of this whole show. Yeah, and of course, women's partner were involved, very much involved in this, because some of them has to do housework as well. Yeah. I want to go on to show some of the, this project from now on was more relating to how my practice has changed. And before that, we talked so much about gender-based approach or practice. At some point, my work eventually become broader, and gender is still an important issue, but it's in relating to a bigger contact now. Yeah. So with this piece, it was about, it was the inaugural shows of the Esplanade in 2002. This huge art venue, art showpiece is going to happen here. And I was curious to know how the common Singaporean feel about it. Yeah, so I went out all over Singapore to interview people and ask them about, what do you think? We're having this huge thing, durian, what has that got to do with you? So I gathered all this text, all this interview, and then I took their portrait and decided to put them at these 8 pillars at the concourse. So they are called pillars of the art. So when the show opened, a lot of them who has nothing to do with art actually came and looked for their portrait. So that was quite fun. So the idea of engaging the public, through this engagement with the public, often people I don't know, often people who have never think they have anything to do with art, got involved in the art. Yeah, so that come to me that they were very important, because art should not be just confined to the appreciations of people who were able, who could afford. In fact, art is always around us in our life. And how can we rediscover that in our life and in us? Yeah, so that become another important principles of my practice. Yeah. So this continue to become more and more engaging the public, and also questioning the role of the audience in the art making, and also, of course, the meaning of the art, and the role of the art in societies, and how can I talk about art in a way that any other people in general public can relate to easily. Yeah. So this work is Worthy Tour. Worthy Tour engages with some specific audience who were actually individual collectors. They were individual collectors out of their own very personal interests, collected some of very important artifacts over many years, and they are at their old age now, and decided that they have to make a decision to find some institution to take over the collection, otherwise they can't continue with it. Yeah, because they were important artifacts. Yeah, unfortunately, the institution here didn't see the treasure, so they went overseas, different places in China, Hong Kong, Malaysia, all over the place. So in my research, I traces this route and interview the people and institution overseas who took them. Yeah, and they involved, for example, a film archive, the Chinese art of Tang Song, very important artifacts that one curator, an individual collectors collected, that represent activities, businesses of Singapore River. And also a self-taught artist who discovered bonsai out of sui xian, which is a tropical plant. Yeah, and it ended up in Shanghai Botanic Garden because they didn't have tropical bonsai. And they were very curious how, whether this tropical plant can happen in Shanghai. So they created a kind of laboratory, and this collector became the lecturers there, and they also organized, exhibition for him. So he's now, they have established a museum there. He's now one of the museum, recorded in the museum with all his work and his life achievement. Yeah. So this is the Worthy Tour, and it was presented at the first inaugural Biennale, and on
in this building.
Yeah. Let's check was presented here. I wanted to show you and say again that they were very important work for me, because you will see the change in terms of my approach to performance work. The earlier work that you saw were very theatrical, obviously theater productions, resources that I were influenced and make reference from. As with Let's Walk and Let's Chat, I realized that, especially with Let's Walk, it happens at the time when I was given the studios and then had to sign an agreement because of the Joseph Ng incident that I would not do performance in my own studio. Yeah, so I decided that, okay, if I can't do my performance in the studio, then let me bring my performance out into the street. And that's how Let's Walk or Walk with the Stool and all the Walk series came about. Yeah. Then I found out that actually it was very interesting to turn the whole city your canvas, your working space. Yeah. So, and then you have ready audience, and the audience were curious to know about your work. Yeah. So that was all the benefits I got, from this discovery. Yeah. And of course, Let's Check actually developed from Mom's collaboration because, sitting together, family members sitting together and pluck the roots of the bean sprouts was a common practice at home, common activities at home. And it is all this at this time where we gossip, we share jokes, or we make complaints to each other, where family members actually communicate with each other. Yeah. But today, I look at the younger kids, the kind of family life. You can be in the MRT, it's a common sight. Everyone has their own screen. We are going outing, family outing, but everyone is occupied on this screen. Yeah. So obviously, the idea of communication or family relation is all different now. Yeah. So this work try to talk about that. And I have these two work become open ends work. It just go on and on and on. And they can happen anywhere. And each time I bring it to another cultural context, there will always a very, very quick response from people who has the similar kind of complaints or experience. Yeah, the kind of life has become so isolated in modern world. And we come up with all these convenience gadget thanks to the advanced technology. But then on the other hand, we have actually been taken, or we paid a lot for that. And we are not careful with that, then what is it to be a human being in this world now? Yeah.
So this is the final slide, and I just suddenly realized that it was very appropriate because of all the National Day rehearsals happening around us. So I'll let Amanda talk about it, but it was actually came up quite a few years ago in response to wanting to show it at National Day.
Yeah. Single was an ongoing project, and it is been exhibited in many forms. So it could be in photographs, it could be in installation work or a performance. It's basically a performance for me. It's a persona. I'm a Singapore girl, of course, but and instead of calling myself Singapore girl, I'm not allowed to. Yeah, I call myself a single. But of course, this is a pun. Single. Single is in Singapore is not the right thing, not politically correct, because you don't get married and then you can't produce enough baby for the national service. Yeah, and so this is but this single wants to do many other things. Just want to have fun, just don't want to be programmed. Yeah, so single started. Single start to kind of course, the research into Singapore girl, my issues with how Singapore girl is being constructed as a national image, for this newly independent country. And to present women as an object, a desirable object, catering to, all these male gaze. Yeah, so that's problematic. And then it associates with this national identity. That's even more problematic. Yeah, so I wanted to deal with all those things. Yeah. And with this case, the single became an online project. I had this print done at the invitations of the Taylor print to make a print. It's a celebration of 50 years Asia Societies in New York. And I make my contribution with this print. So they invited me, obviously didn't realize that, expecting me to make a print, but I ended up making performance there, showing all this thing, working with a technician. So then it came out with this print, using some motif of the SIA Girls costume, yeah, and then with my own bottom, yeah. Then eventually I decided that I have to engage the wider women. Everyone can be Singapore girl, can be single, if you like. Yeah. All you need to do is contribute a picture of your bare bottom. Then I realized that a lot of us, we didn't know how our bottom looked like. So the first time I saw my bottom, yeah. So it must be quite exciting for all other women as well, including a male too. And I have some male who pretend to be women. I have accepted them too. Yeah. So if you can tell, make a guess. But this is just part of it. Huh? Now I have 200 of that, bottom and single. Yeah.
But you also wanted, I remember, to do get a contingent of the participants to be part of the National Day Parade.
Yes, yes. The original idea, because in National Parade, we used to have this contingent by the Singapore girl. They were really pretty and then making a parade there. I want to make a single contingent, see, with enough participants and then marching there. Yeah. Unfortunately, it didn't materialize.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Amanda. So I've been informed we have 5 minutes. So I'm not going to ask any questions because I'm sure there'll be questions from the audience. So there's a mic floating around, and we can probably take a few questions before we have to leave this place because of the National Day. So, any questions? No? Really? No questions. Oh.
Chaitek, how does it feel seeing your young pictures in the She documentation? Chaitek is now a famous artist, and we spotted him in a documentation of She just now. Share. Maybe you can contribute some idea about She when you were looking at them.
Really, no idea at all because
no idea what I was doing, right?
No, I also have not many memory about. I guess I'm busy with other things in my mind.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, okay. If there really is no questions, I guess I can ask a question. And it was one of the things that I was thinking about when you presented, because all the works you showed from like the 80s until today, and in that time you've been so active, not just in art making, but as an organizer. And I was wondering, do you feel as urgent a need now? Like, has anything really changed from, the early 90s when you were trying to make these exhibitions of women's artists' works?
Yeah, I think when you first started, of course, the early days as a young artist, you were not having a lot of opportunities. But thanks to Joseph Ng's case and the band of funding, I became international. Yeah, then I got a lot more opportunities. And as you were exposed to outside world, you begin to realize that you can actually do a lot of things. So the more I get involved in, as a result of that, then artists take the multiple roles. You are the organizer, you create the work, you're also a director, you organize your participants, you collaborate with some other people, not only just the art field, but also engages with other people who has very different kind of expertise. So this pooling of resources and bringing all kinds of things together and working together to materialize certain ideas was very exciting for me. And of course, in Singapore, then you realize also that you can never practice as a real full-time artist. You have to somehow or rather find other job. You can be freelance, graphic designer. Most of the artists here, become part-time teacher, part-time lecturers at school. So I get a chance to teach in many different institutions, and those were really great opportunity to be connected with younger generation practitioners and also art students who prepare themselves to engage with arts. Yeah, so it become a very bigger, much bigger community. Yeah.
Yeah, so the other thing that was very striking with the presentation is how many women artists are no longer practicing. And I'm just wondering, do you think it's this problem, like you can't be a full-time artist in Singapore, you have to find something else, or is it because of family? Is it like why? Because some of them are married to male artists, and the male artists' careers have continued, but their wives have stopped practicing.
Yes. I did pick up this particular issue, which is very important for in relating to developments of women artists' career. Yes, I have invited quite many women artists who married artist husband, and yeah, so there is the reality. You know, this traditional role continue even. Women worked today and became economically independent. But the deep down role, traditional role, still there, no change. Yeah. So in the end, most of the time, women artists has to give way by taking a stable job, a salary job, so that the husband can continue practice. Yeah. And then you continue to work full-time in a salary job. You want to practice, but you also take care of your children. So this is the realities of the women artists today. Many, of course, you know, when I first started Women in the Arts Archive, there were 70 women contributed to portfolios. By that time in 2000, that was in 1999, by the time 2003, when we start to put an online archive, there were only 4 women artists left. What happened to the rest, that half of them? They have to get married, set up their family, and decided they can't continue anymore. Yeah. So this is still a reality of the women artists today. Yeah. But I think part of this, apart from these traditional roles and you know, very stubborn mindset that cannot change among you know, the male population, it is also women themselves has no determinations to make a better life for themselves. But of course, there's this maternal urge. You know, you feel guilty if you let go of your responsibilities. Yes? Okay. So you were asking about my mom's response to the work. Yeah, yeah. The collaboration with my mom lasted for 2 years. Yeah, but of course, you know, I worked consciously with her even before that. Yeah, because I knew that I have to address this issue. I wanted to make connection with my mother because I felt that I didn't have that kind of strong relationship with her. Yeah, and I wanted to, at that point, take the opportunity to really understand her because of my interest in finding myself, as well as dealing with the women issues and so on. Yeah, so I need to understand women of her generation, how do they position themselves and so on. Yeah, so I started really consciously working with her way before this whole project became real. That continues for two years. Yeah, of course it wasn't easy because we have also a language problem. She speaks only dialect, and my dialect was not very good, and I can't even say dialect what is art. Yeah, so how to go about? So, which is part of the good reason that I got her involved in the art making. So it is through this process of making that I'm trying to make her understand what I'm doing. Of course, because I gave up a salary job, you know, and not getting married in my 30s, she was very worried, of course. And we couldn't speak for quite a long period of time at home. Yeah, she was obviously very worried about me. How am I going to continue with my life without money, without finding a husband, and things like that. Yeah, but I was desperately trying to figure out who am I, what am I doing here, how can I continue in a meaningful way for myself. Yeah, so I needed to have that connection with her. And I discovered that through the art making with her, I could then begin to kind of understand her. And then she could then begin to realize that what I'm doing is of some meaning to her. Yeah. So that's how we begin. And I don't know how to answer your question, but there were a lot of little things. For example, that I remember I wanted to bring all those photographs that we make together to Bangkok. There was no money. In those days, there was no money. I couldn't afford to bring them myself. So I was sharing with her about this. And of course, I have a brother and sisters living in Bangkok. And then she come up with this idea that let's go visit them. And she paid for my air tickets. So it's through this kind of little gesture that I realized that she actually appreciates what I do. Yeah. I think she came to realize or feel proud of me was from my neighbor. Because eventually when the work was shown in Singapore, they came out in the paper. The neighbor were educated people. They read about it, and then they brought the paper to show her. And she came to ask me about it. Yeah, so I get a sense that she began to be very proud of me when the neighbor tell her that I was popular. Yeah, like the movie star, you know.
Thanks for the question. And I think we actually have run out of time for this session today. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to Amanda for sharing.
Thank you for your time.
And please visit the exhibition.